Welcome to Chart Chat. In this series, we look at the subject's chart for the first time and share our initial reactions. This is not meant to be a comprehensive dive into the chart, but rather an intuitively led discussion of our first impressions and what we know about the person already.
I see what you mean about her having like the coolest looking chart you've ever seen.
I mostly this is what it shows with all the aspects, but then this one here, let me open this up. It looks cool.
Wow.
Like the most simple version of it looks literally like a pendulum or something like that.
Something like a sword.
Yeah.
Which definitely makes sense with her overall vibe she's got going on. I love her, by the way. I'm brand new to Janelle Monáe. Maddie introduced me, but I'm so glad.
For recording, I'll just say that we're going to talk about Janelle Monáe today, about her chart. And seriously, look at this chart. It looks so cool. And I'm not like the most familiar with her. I don't know a ton about her, which actually kind of I think makes this a little more interesting to look at her chart. But way back when I was in like 8th grade, I saw Bruno Mars in concert, and she was the opener, this is why I know about her. And she was in her little like tuxedo outfit and just like looked so cool. And she's just a very fascinating person.
Totally.
So here's like the super simple version of her chart, but let's look at this one here with all the aspects and everything.
Yeah. And Chiron and the South Node, and got all the good stuff on there.
So
holy moly, Sagittarius, first off.
Seriously?
Which makes so much sense because she does have such a point of view. And we'll link the few things that Maddie found for me to watch since I am brand new. We can put those in the description, which is like 10-15 minutes of getting to know her personality. And the main thing is her point of view and her like need to create something in the world that reflects that. And that Sagittarius energy, my goodness, that's a powerful motivator for sure.
Seriously, that is literally, it actually kind of reminds me a little bit of when we talked about Joe Rogan last week, and he had that Leo right at the bottom of his chart there. And I was saying it's almost kind of like the light in his lantern. And look at that. It's like kind of the same for her too.
Well, especially like her sun is like almost on top of her IC, like it's in the very basement of her chart, like the beginning of our 4th house, like our most deep private realm. And that's where her sun is. So yeah, one thing that stands out that she said was like she easily fits into multiple different marginalized groups, and that her work is like creating a voice for those people. And as a person who maybe does or doesn't really fit into those marginalized groups, like at least I don't know that I do, it's like very interesting to hear her perspective, because she's taking the pain of being marginalized and turning it into something like a work of art, like literally, that other people can then look at that and say, that's the story of my life too. And how empowering that can be.
Very powerful. And then, right across from that, here at the top of her chart is her moon in Gemini. And that's interesting because she also does talk about how she tries her best to speak to, she speaks her truth. And she says, like, this is for everyone, whether you agree with me or not, like, this is for everyone. And that to me is like kind of Gemini energy of like being so multifaceted and being able to speak, like she's speaking her truth, but it's speaking to everyone, whether you align with that truth or not. And her heart, I always think of the moon being associated with someone's heart, and it's like her heart is right there at the top of everything that she does.
Yeah, moon conjunct midheaven, like what she has here, is a common artist placement. Like basically the midheaven being your soul's work, and the moon right there means your emotions are your soul's work. Essentially, like everything that you need to do is coming through your own emotional experience. And she talks openly about her mental health journey and her therapy and the self-evolution that she's going through you know? And I think that's so important. I love it when anybody does that, because we are all going through things, and bringing it out into the open where it can be seen and appreciated. And like the moon at the very top of your chart, yeah, you're basically like leading out into the world with your emotions.
Yeah, hard on your sleeve. And
A
that's
little
so
bit.
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting to see that as being like a common artist placement, because, you know, it just kind of makes sense.
Yeah. It
That's
does.
so much of art is like expression. I mean, it's expressing your most vulnerable self in these, you know, beautiful ways that it's just, yeah, it's just so interesting.
So I'm all up in the nodes lately, as you know. And what you just said reminds me of her Capricorn South Node that's down here at the bottom of her chart in her fourth house, and her Cancer North Node. Like her goal as a soul, like her evolution that she's here to work on, is to access her own vulnerability. And that's also up there in her 10th house, where again, you would think now you use that vulnerability to like make something out in the world, make a legacy that other people can share.
Yeah, because they are like, you know, seeing that Cancer North Node in the 10th house, like that's Capricorn's house, right? So they're flipped. And that's always interesting to me. Like, I think it's such
I
a
love it.
fascinating placement when you have your North and South node in, you know, it's Cancer and Capricorn, and then they're in the opposite houses. Like you've got Cancer's in Capricorn's house and Capricorn is in Cancer's house. So what does that
Yeah.
mean? Like to me, it means finding balance between those things and finding, yeah, that striking that balance between the super structured and serious energy of Capricorn as so responsible and, you know, makes things happen and can really get work done. But then that's in the house of Cancer, which is so interesting, which is, you know, nurturing and emotions and taking care of people, which is also to me really interesting because I see that shine through in a lot of the things that she says, is that like she really, like, she has a lot of love for all people, whether they're similar to her or not. She says like, whether you agree with what I'm saying, if you're different from me, like this is for you too. You know, she just wants to empower you, whoever you are.
Which is a very fourth house South Node attribute, which would be like a Cancer South Node. And the love that these people are capable of is something to behold. And basically, when you have your North Node in the 10th house, I just released a video on this. That's why it's like right there fresh. It's like you can, like, you're supposed to be in charge, basically. Like, you should rule the world essentially, because you have that deep, caring compassion for all creatures. That, like, imagine a world where every single boss, they wanted to empower you and nurture you with the work that they assigned, that was their motivation, that they're only ever asking you to do anything because they think it brings out the best in you, and they're trying to lift you up so that you see how good you are. Like, imagine if all the bosses in the world were like that. That's like these 10th house North Node people stepping into their rightful place at the helm, at the leadership position. The one who has the final decision making ability is ultimately what the leader is. And the fourth house South Node doesn't want that, but Capricorn South Node is all about being the one who gets to make the decisions. So that's where, yeah, when they're flipped, I love that. And it's exactly what you said about balance. And like, basically, the way that she puts it in her book, Jan Spiller in Astrology for the Soul, she talks about when you have that, it's flipped exactly like opposite. It's like you're on a more advanced course of study, where it's what you said, like you're trying to figure out how to really harness the best of both of them and put it together, and like ultimately sink back down into what is even the point? What is the point of Capricorn's drive to build something? Like, yes, it can get to the top of the mountain, but what's the point in getting to the top of the mountain? Cancer holds the key to that. And love is the point. Like, self-love, loving others. Yeah, and she embodies that, all of that in her work. Like, she's very prolific. She's like the CEO of some big company and like does all these different things. And then she's also this artist, like creating from this really genuine, obviously deep place.
Yeah.
And like doing it all. It's really a cool combination of energy in general.
Yeah. And in more recent years, she's also been in a lot of movies. So she's like really kind of pursuing that acting career. And it seems like, I mean, I know she was in like Moonlight and Hidden Figures. I think there was another one. Oh, the one about Harriet Tubman too. So like a lot of the movies that she's in are highlighting these stories of like particularly like Black women and like the like experience that like Black people have had in America, and really like lifting up those voices. I'm thinking of Hidden Figures in particular. It's the story of the three women who were around like in the early NASA days and were really instrumental in like like computer science. Like it just,
they were like
amazing.
Human computers
Literally.
basically, and like doing the calculations that let it all happen, and totally behind the scenes, not given credit, like just
No credit.
Yeah.
And so she's like using her platform now to uplift those stories of other people who were marginalized and who didn't get credit where it was due in their time, and she's using her voice and her platform to do that, which is super cool. I don't even know like where in her astrology would speak to that. I mean, I guess a lot of the Sagittarius energy
of her putting her ideas out there, or like speak to which part?
Like uplifting the voices of other people who have, been in certain marginalized groups that she can identify with.
I think what jumped out to me as you were saying that is Pluto in Libra and Saturn in Scorpio, and both of those are in her second house. And Pluto in the second house means a deep wound of self-worth. And like, I mean, you and I were talking before we came on the recording about how like when we heal ourselves, when we activate our own power, and then we demonstrate that out into the world, other people are like, holy shit, I didn't even know that was possible. So, I mean, she's done a lot of work on herself and been very open about the healing journey that she's on. And I would imagine like she has personally experienced a lot of this pain. Also, that Saturn and Jupiter in Scorpio, I mean, you're going to experience the negative side of human emotions like really intensely, so that you can put it in its place. You can understand like what it is and why it is, and how you use it as a tool to turn it into something beautiful. Like that Jupiter in Scorpio in the third house is opposite her Chiron in Taurus in the ninth house. So her Chiron is also in the house of Sagittarius, her wounded healer archetype in the house of Sagittarius. Like, yeah, like she described herself as a storyteller. And so, yeah, like lifting up those stories and telling that story because of the pain that was underneath or caused as a result of trying to hide the story, or like any of that. I mean, definitely letting the pain fuel her.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the highest expression that any of us, I think, can ever reach for. That's definitely nailing the Saturn and Scorpio side of it for sure. It's like you got to take that pain and turn it into something that lets you feel better about it. That's really all you can do with it.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I mean, seriously, like it just, even just the shape of her chart. I'll go back to this like simpler looking one. Like, look at that. It literally, you're right, it looks like a sword. And the first thing I said was like a pendulum, almost like showing the motion of a pendulum.
It looks like it's like dangling and swinging back and forth.
Which
so intentional.
Hello. Yeah, intentional. There's balance going on there. And then just like thinking of like a sword, like she's a warrior,
She is.
There's power in that Sagittarius energy, that she's like wielding that. That's like the hilt of her sword. And she's using that to like fight her battles that are so important in this world. It's like seriously the coolest looking thing. Like, wow, it's unique. And she's like so unique, and she embraces that wholeheartedly. but she uses that angle too of like her being so unique to help empower people who are similar to her and different from her.
Yeah.
There's something very
As you're commenting on her uniqueness, I'm like testing my own reference points, like to look at where would I normally look for unique energy. And Leo and Aquarius are first on my list, and she doesn't have placements in those signs. So then I go to 11th house, 5th house, and there her Mars is in her 5th house. So that like drive to create, that makes so much sense.
totally.
But also I think in her case, I think the sun being conjunct Uranus is definitely stirring up her shit, and that's on her IC. So like it's happening at the core of her being. That individuality is inescapable and it has to go somewhere, and all of that is opposite her moon. So like kind of balancing her individuality with her emotional expression and like all of that. I mean, you can just see it in her work that this is playing out. And what a gift. What a gift that she is, that she built herself with this tension, which would drive her nearly insane until she figured out how to channel it. And then once you figure out how to channel it, then you get to live a happy life. And the rest of us are gifted by what comes out of your channeled expression. I think there's a lot of us experiencing the madness phase before you figure out how to like successfully channel your energy.
Definitely. And thinking of where she comes from, I mean, she was born in Kansas City, Kansas, to, you know, like blue collar workers. I think some of the background research we did just, I think it said her parents were like a custodian and like a bus driver or something. So, you know, very humble beginnings. And there is that Chiron in Taurus that makes me wonder about like her home life and what her relationship was like with her family. But just to be born in, you know, like a more conservative area to blue collar working parents who, you know, probably like expressing your truest self, it's not like super high on the list of priorities. And here she is, this highly unique, super creative being that is part of her journey to start out in a place like that and to be able to find herself, and not just find herself, but find ways to express herself, to pursue her individuality. And she did that.
Big time.
She did that.
Big time.
We can all
Going
do that.
exactly. Like I feel like it's such a common path that especially at this time, it feels like so many people are waking up to themselves and like their own truth. And she's somebody that is just built so that that process maybe was a little more accelerated, that her personal version of the truth had to be expressed with this opposition. Yeah, that's intense. That would fuel a lot of things going on inside her. And the rest of us, here we come, like making our way leisurely into this. And she's here as this example of what could be. But there are so many people in this world that can be that example. You know, like every time any of us speak our truth, we activate other people to lean a little bit more into theirs.
Exactly.
Going to what you said about Chiron and Taurus, that like the second house is Taurus's house. So to have Chiron, Pluto, and Saturn all tied to her Taurus / second house energy, yeah, that and like that's our physical security in the earthly realm. It speaks to a very insecure beginning, like physically insecure. And I mean, I've studied Pluto in the second house a lot, looking at the US Pluto return. Yeah, because the US has Pluto in the second house. Like as a country, we have that. And so it feels like, again, her healing journey and her working through what she has and expressing herself the way she has, like even her artistry has evolved as she's accepted herself more. Like she talked about her character before, how she was the robot, and now it's a more direct expression of this is who I am. There's not really the in-between part. So it's an awesome journey of watching her accept herself and watching how that opens the valve like wider and wider as far as what she's able to express into the world. And she's so young. She's only like 40, like maybe not even 40. Like she's so young. Like we're only just beginning to like see really what she's She's here to express.
I think she'll turn 40.
Gonna be 40 this year.
Right.
She'll be 40 in December.
Cool.
Yeah.
Look
Which
at
means,
that.
yeah, it's just a
Beautiful.
shit ton of Sagittarius. For anybody wanting to know, those are the sun, like starting on the left in the mutable. Oh no, start there. Yeah, that's fine.
Oh.
So like in the, okay, yeah, there. So the sun, and then Mercury, and then Venus, and then Uranus, and then Neptune. So Uranus and Neptune are both generational planets. They move very slowly. So they both spent years in Sagittarius. So anybody kind of around that same age would have those. But the Sun, Mercury, and Venus are all personal planets. The other personal planets are the Moon and Mars. So to have all like 3 out of the 5 personal planets in one sign, it's very, very energizing. Like to have any of those 3 in Sagittarius would already give her a heavy dose of this, like having to find her own truth sort of thing. But to put all 3 of them, it's like a daily process of like, she has to be on this journey. Like it's just, she can't get away from it. So yeah, that's a lot of energy to pack into one sign.
It is. And that was very intentional, very on purpose. Like she had work to do here. It's clear that being her truest self and pursuing that, so Sagittarian, like that's so important to the work that she's doing in this life. And she gets to be this living example for the rest of us. But she's opening doors for everyone else. Which is super cool. Pioneer.
Which, I mean, just in general, she's got like the Cancer North Node, but also like all of this in the 4th house where, I mean, I know it's in Sagittarius, but that's the domain of Cancer. And the way she has nurtured herself and has like used that to kind of build up her own sense of security so that she can nurture other people. Like, yeah, it's a beautiful offering of energy that she does. And it looks like, I mean, there's a ton of tension in this chart. Like anytime we see all those red lines, like that's going to be difficult to manage early on, but she has clearly found her way to, how do you let it out? Like so many of us, we keep it bottled up and that causes so many problems. Playtime. But yeah, you got to let it out, whatever that looks like. And it's fun to see how, like, I mean, she's always been authentic. She's always been unique, but it's almost like the authenticity of what she does, it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Like as she goes on in her healing journey, she's able to offer more and more and more of herself. It's so cool to see.
It really is. And just, I mean, like her as a person, I mean, she's such a like open, like she identifies as pansexual, and I think she also identifies as non-binary, so she uses she her as well as they them pronouns, which is really just like, I mean, talk about just openness and like not identifying with this or that and just being so truthfully and genuinely herself. And you know, there are like labels in themselves, like pansexual or non-binary. It's technically a label, but it's a label saying that you can't
I'm
label
open.
me.
Yeah.
It's the only label for saying like I will not be labeled. And that's like, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Which
just embracing it.
sounds a lot like her Gemini moon. And then I look down to her 3rd house, which would be associated with Gemini, and she's got Jupiter and Uranus.
Yep.
So like not only an emotional need, which would be the moon, but an abundance of, and a really fierce rebellious streak of individuality and openness. That like, yeah, I don't commit to anything other than being open. Like that sounds very much like a true Gemini moon for sure. And to lead with that, because that, like, again, what we were talking about before, like to heal as a collective, there's an open-mindedness that we as individuals can cultivate that let us talk to and hear from people with different viewpoints than ourselves. And she has that. She has just an emotional ability to be open, or an emotional need to be open. and offering that, like with it right there at the top of her chart, offering that as an example and showing us what that looks like to like let people be different from you. Like that's okay. Doesn't take anything away from you to let them do their thing.
Exactly.
I mean, it seems so simple, and yet we can get real twirled up in what other people are doing and needing them to conform, or the status quo. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not really what she's here for. Like she's like, let's find our authenticity, our uniqueness, and see what happens from there.
Yeah. And she's
Yeah.
totally like, this is what it looks like for me. Like, what does it look like for you? That's totally cool too.
Yeah. That
That's
Gemini, like that third house, let's just open a conversation. We don't even need to necessarily find an answer. Let's just come talk to each other. Let's just be with each other. Let's just be curious and explore. Like that's just, it's a beautiful energy. It really is. To
and
just
just
be
all
open.
of like to use her different forms of art as a medium for that is very powerful. I mean, that's something that a lot of the time, like we can, when we don't agree on things, like we can come together through music, through movies, through art. And she's using various of those mediums to convey her message. And I think it was we'll link it in the description, but it was an interview with Trevor Noah in like 2018, I think. She was saying when she was on the set of Hidden Figures, she was working on her album Dirty Computer, that's what it's called, and how she just like, it just, every day she was working on that film and representing one of those women who was like a part of that work with NASA. Like she just, the more she realized that, like she's like, I gotta finish this album because if like I'm the only one who can tell my story. I'm the only one who can express what's inside of me. No one else can do it. Like only I can tell this story. And that's so true for all of us that, your voice matters. It doesn't matter if someone else has a similar perspective and they've already said it before. Like what you have to say and how you want to say it matters. And only you can do that.
I loved that part too. I meant to bring it up too, because that there's a quote I've heard that's very similar that's like, write the book that only you could write. Like not the book that you think is going to be the New York Times bestseller, but like your book, the one that only you could do. And like she said in that interview, like if you don't tell your story, then it's lost because nobody else can tell it for you. And if we don't tell these stories, then they're just lost. They're not counted as part of history. And not that like, is the end all be all of everything, but it like we judge ourselves a lot based on what's happened in history. So bringing these stories forward, like help people to feel more accomplished, more secure, like in the right now moment. When we remember like these figures through history that inspire us. So it just feels like such good work, such meaningful work. And it's just so fun to think about, like, what is our purpose? Everybody wants to know what their purpose is and trying to define it as like some big grand mission. And it's like, tell your story. That's probably most of our purpose, is just to be here and live and tell your story. And what can happen from that, the ripple effects that can happen when you just show up.
No one else can be you. Only you can be you. And if you don't tell your story, then, that story can't be told. Because I admit I don't know much about what's going on with her, like, right now.
Yeah, I'm not current. She's got Jupiter about to hit her descendant in Pisces.
Interesting.
I was watching this playlist that Molly McCord made a few years ago where she goes through notable transits in each decade of your life. So it's like 0 to 20 in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s, and your 50s. And so I was looking at like several of those in my own chart, trying to figure out like when different things happened. She looks like she's somewhat in between things right now. Because like at 36, I believe, is our Jupiter return. So she had that a few years ago. And then in our very late 30s, pretty much until 50, we pretty much go through like intense becoming type transits for that whole time. Looking forward to it, really am. But yeah, she's coming up like here in the next few years. She'll have her Uranus opposition. Uranus will get up there to 5 degrees of Gemini, and that'll be her Uranus opposition. That happens in our early 40s. Her Chiron return, that's got like a whole nother decade. But yeah, that was a very interesting playlist as far as looking at some things.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Just to know that that's kind of up and coming for her. We'll have to keep an eye on what she's up to.
I know, because she's already like so individuated, and that's ultimately what our Uranus opposition wants from us. It wants us to become who we were born to be, and I think she's done an incredible job of that. But again, all that energy being in the bottom of her chart, I'll bet you like we've barely begun to scratch the surface of like how deep her well really goes.
Wow. So we'll have to see. I'm sure she's got great things ahead. Probably
No
only
doubt.
just getting started.
She's a lovely soul. I'm so glad you brought her to us and introduced us.
Yeah, she just, I mean, seriously, like I had just glanced at her chart before. I just saw like, I mean, like, look at
the
this.
shape of it is very memorable.
It's so cool.
Yes.
And it's so unique. And I think that even that alone speaks to her and who she is.
Yeah.
It's
love it.
Her uniqueness and her individuality it's like a warrior energy for her. She uses that to fight her way like lovingly, through the world. It's her fire.
Yeah. Like her truth is her sword, and she wields it very bravely, for sure.
She does. And
I
she uses
love
it
these.
in defense of others, not just like fighting for her own agenda, but it seems pretty apparent that she's fighting on behalf of all people, no matter who you are.
Yeah, which is very Sagittarius in the 4th house. Like if you have that Sagittarius IC or any Sagittarius placements that fall in your 4th house, like that, like using your truth to protect and nurture other people, like that feels very much like how all of that would come together.